and welcome to our viewers in the US and right around the world. I'm Linda Kincaid, and this is CNN Newsroom. In just a few hours, Pope Francis will lead a mass in Havana's Revolution Square. On Saturday, the Pope had a very strong message for its people and the government: open up to the world and give people the freedom and space to practice religion. The Cuban capital is the first stop on the Pope's 10-day visit to Cuba, which will then be followed by the US. He's credited with helping restore diplomatic ties between the two nations, and now he's urging them to stay on that course.
I urge political leaders to persevere on this path and to develop all its potentialities as a proof of high service, which they are called to carry out on behalf of the peace and the well-being of the people of all America, and as an example of reconciliation for the entire world.
The Pope will be in Havana until Tuesday. After that, he'll head to the US, where he'll visit Washington, Philadelphia and New York. CNN Vatican correspondent Delia Gallagher is in Rome for us. Delia, what are some of the main messages the Pope will make in Cuba?
Linda, the messages of Pope Francis for Cuba, he laid out in his talk right away at the airport as soon as he arrived. First one being religious freedom for the Catholic Church in particular. He asked that they have the space and means to continue their work in Cuba. That's a big point for the Vatican and Pope Francis. He also made reference to democratic freedoms for the Cuban people, saying that he would pray for the Cuban people and the Cuban nation that they continue along the path of justice, liberty, and reconciliation. And the third point the Pope made in his talk yesterday, which is another big point for the Vatican, is the reopening of U.S.-Cuban relations. And what's interesting is the Pope used a kind of subtle phrase when he referred to those relationships. And he said, you know, this needs to continue. The dialogue needs to continue for the well-being of all peoples of all America. That means not just peoples of United States and Cuba, but the two combined. The Pope reminding Americans and Cubans that they are neighbors and indeed are part of one family. They're part of the American continent. So he's putting them both in the same boat, as it were, and saying all America, reminding them each of their responsibility towards one another. Linda?
And Delia, it was interesting to know the Pope requested Wi-Fi in a country where it's often patchy or disconnected. He's going to meet with some youth today. What's the plan?
Today he has a busy day, and it's going to be a good day for the Pope and for the Cuban people because it's a day when he can meet directly with them. You mentioned he'll be meeting with some of the youth this evening, and of course one of the big things for young people nowadays is Wi-Fi and the access to that, and some discussions have been going on since the summer with Cuba to allow more access to Wi-Fi, not just for youth but for people working in Cuba, for journalists, and indeed for Catholic Church officials as well, to be able to communicate with the outside world. When the Pope says that the world be open to Cuba and Cuba open to the world, that's obviously one of the ways that you can do that. In addition, today he'll be holding a big mass outside in the Revolution Square, and that will be an opportunity for the Pope to speak directly to the Cuban people. After that, he will have his official meeting with President Raul Castro and with other members of the Cuban government. But today is a big day for the Pope to speak directly to the Cuban people. Linda?
And is it likely that the Pope will meet with Fidel Castro?
The Vatican says that is a possibility. It was interesting that yesterday the first greeting he gave after he greeted President Raul Castro was to ask him to pass on his sentiments of deep respect for Fidel Castro. So it is likely that a meeting will happen. And if it does happen, it might happen today when the Pope meets with Raul Castro and the other government officials.
We'll be watching that closely. Delia Gallagher, as always, thank you very much.